Hi, it's Jessica Halloran from The Australian. Thank you for listening to The Breakdown. This podcast is made possible with the support of The Australian subscribers. Subscribers can hear the full series now via The Australian app. They also have access to our sports coverage and analysis on all devices. To see our subscription offers, visit theaustralian.com.au/subscription. Can you take me to the final moments of the 99 World Cup and where you were sitting and what happened?
Oh, all I go was sitting, watching it at Kirribilli House. Jumping up and down. Yeah. It was so exciting.
Prime Ministers have to be sports fans to survive. Sport is the language we all speak. Some pollies just put on a brave face and pretend to care. But John Howard was a true sporting tragic. He wore a Wallabies tracksuit on his daily morning walk. In 1999, he had just secured a huge political win in Australia's Republic referendum. Then he sat down to watch his beloved Wallabies face the French in the Rugby World Cup final.
I was in a good mood. Yeah. I mean, it didn't get any better. I got the result I wanted in the referendum, and the Wallabies won the World Cup.
The Australian Rugby Union's cabinet was packed with silverware from an incredibly successful year. The Wallabies, captained by the ever-reliable John Eales, had won the coveted Bledisloe Cup for 2 years in a row. The biggest trophy of all was the World Cup. It's called the William Webb Ellis Trophy, but the Australians call it Bill. The game had never been more popular, and so when the Wallabies, hungover from the continuous cocktail party aboard their flight from London, strutted into the Great Hall at Parliament House, everyone wanted a piece of them. John Howard invited them back to his official residence, the Lodge, for a barbecue. They filled the Webb Ellis Trophy with rum and coke and everyone sculled it, including the straight-laced Prime Minister himself and his wife, Jeanette.
I had a dinner at the Lodge for the players and wives or girlfriends, and we drank out of and we had the Old Bill, we had the William Webb Ellis Trophy, we had the Bledisloe Cup, and we had the Cook Cup, which is England and Australia. There was no Mandela. This was 1999. It was before the Mandela Trophy had been inaugurated, and yeah, we did drink out of that. We did, and my wife joined in, and it was a great night, and it was a terrific night, and they really had a great crowd of blokes and wives and girlfriends, of course, and it was a terrific night.
Around 1 a.m, they were moved on from the Lodge and everyone went back to their hotel. John O'Neill was Rugby CEO at the time.
Went to bed, and about 1:10, there's this thumping on the door, and it's John Eales. And I said, go away. And, no, we've still got a party going on. We're staying at the Hyatt in Canberra. So I let him in. I've been hard not to let him in. And so I go change into a tracksuit or something, and I come back and there's John lying on top of the bed with my wife with a phone to his ear. He's phoning his mother. And at 1:30 in the morning, oh, Mum, I'll just put Julie on. So there's Julie chatting to Mrs. Eales. And then away we went. And John, his nickname was the Alley Cat. John had successfully gone around the whole hotel getting people out of bed, even David Clark, the then chairman. And we were sitting around singing songs, laughing, and no one could go to bed. John would actually crash tackle you and drag you back. And then at about 5:36, the sun was coming up, and I said, look, I really have to go to bed. And just like a pussycat, he said, yeah, okay, go to bed. So I went. So the next day was chaotic. I missed the plane. John literally, got straight on the bus. Then I get a phone call from him about 10 o'clock saying he'd arrived back in Sydney or Brisbane, but he'd left his watch, he'd left his computer, he'd left everything behind. Could I go to his room and pick it up, which being a very attentive CEO, I did.
Wallabies captain John Eales was the man who led Australia to this amazing victory.
But I think if you're a kid growing up and you're honest with yourself, you never believe that you're going to experience those incredible highs. So when you do, you make sure you enjoy them. But I think, what we experienced through that bit of time, Australian rugby has never experienced before in 100 years. That success that we had through those years, and it really was a very, very special time.
This is The Breakdown, the story of how the game, with all the money, ended up broke. I'm Jessica Halloran, Chief Sports Writer at The Australian. Editorial Director Claire Harvey and I have gone deep to find out what went so wrong in Australian Rugby Union. This is Episode 2, The Party. Let's get into the Wallabies' glory days and reveal how the game started to rip itself apart. One of those glory days guys was Phil Kearns, the hooker. He became a Wallaby in 1989. Back then, most players still had day jobs.
We went off to New Zealand in 1990. We played a 3-test tour over there. 7 weeks in New Zealand, which was just like, it's heaven, like every boy's dream. You're 21, 22 years of age. We go over there, we get given all this free kit. We got free beer because Forex was our sponsor. You stay in these hotels and you're playing rugby every day with your mates. And you get a $32 a day allowance. And that was just heaven.
Life for the Wallabies was about to change. It was 1991. It was the World Cup.
Parts of England. Australia welcome back skipper Nick Farr-Jones after injury. He and Michael Lynagh in tandem today for the 38th time, the most experienced halfback pairing in the history of the game. The Wallabies have been building up gradually through this tournament, and now they could be ready to explode.
In the quarterfinals, it looked as though Ireland was about to shock everyone and bundle the Wallabies out.
We seem to be in for a major shock. Ireland leading Australia 18 points to 15.
But some magic from Michael Lynagh saved the Wallabies in the final minute.
The pass, Little to Campese going for his hat-trick. Tackle short, Lynagh's in there, Lynagh scores. So the great champions that they are then, Australia through then by the skin of their teeth. Winning by
Gordon Bray, a voice synonymous with rugby union, was calling the World Cup for the ABC.
But somehow we were able to regroup, and the players said, we're not going to try and kick a goal to get back in touch, we're going to score a try. And that they did. David Campese and Michael Lynagh combined, and I think the ABC commentary team was so dumbstruck that we didn't say anything for 31 seconds when Gordon Hamilton scored his try. But after Michael Lynagh scored the try, the only people you could hear cheering and shouting at Lansdowne Road were the 3 ABC commentators.
Australia won 19-18. Something else was happening. Back home in Australia, people were getting up in the middle of the night to watch these games. That had never happened before, not in rugby union. The first sign they were popular? The faxes.
We got a lot of faxes. Remember those things? You probably don't, Jess. You're too young. But back in the early 90s, they had things called facsimile machines. And when we got to the final in London, they had to put 6 machines into our hotel. We would wake up every morning and thousands of faxes would come in overnight.
That was Nick Farr-Jones, a Wallaby great and now a leading businessman. On November 2, 1991, the Wallabies would defeat England at the spiritual home of rugby, Twickenham. The score was 12-6.
And that's it! The final whistle blows. Australia said from day one they weren't coming here to run second, and they've taken the trophy. Nick Farr-Jones, the Australian captain. The moment he has been working and waiting for. They weren't modest when they arrived. They set their stall out, saying that's what we've come for.
Farr-Jones remembers that year as the culmination of some incredibly hard work. When they won, the feeling was nothing but elation. It was by no means a glamorous victory, but it was still a World Cup win.
It was fantastic to win it, and it was a great relief. I think that's the feeling that I had most, the relief, because we'd worked our butts off. We'd planned for, since really losing to the Lions in '89, the series against the Lions, and it had been that sort of 2-year period of putting the jigsaw together, which was the players that would form a great team. And so you've got to remember that there are a bunch of guys, they became household names, but you've got to remember when these guys were first selected in the Wallabies, a couple of them weren't playing first grade for their club, and a few of them weren't playing for their state. I think of Tim Hoare and Jason Little. But we brought the likes of Hoare and Little, Daly, Kearns, McKenzie into the team, Willie Offahen Galway, Bob Edgerton, John Eales. All those guys came into the team in that 89, 90, 91 period. And then you couple it with some of the experienced heads, and it had the making of a fantastic team that would then go on and, be a very dominant team in world rugby for some time. But it was the work and the hard work and the preparation, and as I said, we worked our butts off, that it was the relief to finally get through. We didn't play well in the final. We defended bloody well, but we only won about high 30 percentages of possession, 38, 39%. We got towelled in the line-out for whatever reason. So how many years are we? What, 29 years beyond? I would love to think that in typical Wallaby form that you scored 4 and 5 tries from 30 metres out, interchange between backs and forwards. It wasn't to be the case. In that final we got one lousy try. It came from a 5 metre sort of line out from the English line, a rolling maul, one of the most, sort of boring ways you could score a try. But 29 years later, I don't care, how we won the game. All I care is that we did, because I have no doubt that I'd be waking at 3 a.m. with cracks in the ceiling getting wider if we didn't take that opportunity.
These Wallabies had no idea what was about to hit them. Nick Farr-Jones was still in London when he heard the New South Wales Premier, Nick Gregan, was going to put on a ticker tape parade in the main street of Sydney to celebrate them. Farr-Jones thought this was a very bad idea. Who would show up? His parents? He rang Gregan from London to beg him to call it off.
I heard that the Premier was looking to put on the ticker tape parade, so I somehow tracked down his secretary and called her, and she put me through. But he just said something like, "Look, I'm sorry, we've announced it. It's happening. It's going ahead." And yes, it was peculiar.
So you said, "Please don't put it on."
Well, I just was really anxious. You got to remember the game was amateur. It had never happened before, and you don't. Whilst you're getting thousands of faxes, you don't realise the impact your team's having on people watching it. And I was really anxious because you're still not sure about the level of support. I was really worried that maybe 200 people had lined, between Circular Quay and Town Hall, that 2 kilometres up George Street. It'd be my parents, there'd be Dave Brockhoff, Rupert Rosenbloom, Saley would be there. I was really worried that there'd just be a really, sparse gathering of just diehard rugby people, and they reckon that day 130,000 people turned up. So that gave you a real sense of the impact you had, and for that reason it was really special.
Phil Kearns was packing it until he saw the crowds.
And it was really the first sporting ticker tape parade, because we honestly thought no one would turn up. We thought the streets will be empty. We're going to be going up the street in these cars, and it's going to be so stupid. And seriously, we had no concept that when we turn the corner from Alfred Street at the Quay, left onto George Street, heading uptown towards the Town Hall, we couldn't believe the masses of people that were there. It was just incredible.
A young John Eales, just 21 back then, was part of that World Cup victory and that parade.
By the number of people that came out onto the street that day, you realised what it meant for Australians, for us to do well at that time. Look, I think the Wallabies always did have a special place, but it all of a sudden became, special became more, grew in popularity. It became more than just a passing interest for a lot of people. It became, a point of pride that they followed the Wallabies, that here was their Australian team.
The code had hit a high, but the Wallabies started to struggle. They crashed out of the 1995 World Cup in the quarterfinals. In the next 3 years, they didn't beat the All Blacks once.
We had the greatest loss ever in Australian rugby history in that period. It was really tough to sort of go through that period of time.
But in September 1997, along came Rob McQueen, a dynamic new coach who turned everything around.
The right guy at the right time to really unite that group of people, and to, I still don't. Rod has got credit. I still don't think Rod has got as much credit as he should have got for, what he was able to do with that World Cup team and how quickly he was able to turn them around by bringing together, a group of players, a group of coaches, a group of support staff in that team environment, and creating an environment that was able to get the absolute best out of those people where they were the best was crucial in us being able to go on and win it.
Rob McQueen liked to be ahead of the curve. McQueen was constantly pushing his team to be better. He developed a style of play for the World Cup that he believed would provide a winning formula under the laws of the game as they stood. He introduced consultants to the team in defence and scrummaging, and it was this attention to detail that made them stronger. Eels says the Wallabies thrived under McQueen's leadership. They made it to the World Cup final in 1999, playing France, who were fresh from beating the All Blacks.
And that is it. Andre Watson brings down the curtain on the 1999 Rugby World Cup. Australia the winners, 35-12. They become the first country to win the trophy twice. A second trophy for their captain John Eales as well.
The Wallabies had the talent, but they also had the steadfast, tight, solid culture. A team who had a lot of faith in each other. This is George Gregan, the gifted scrum half and a future Wallaby captain. He's an icon of the game.
Yeah, we went straight into the change rooms. Obviously, you get the medal, we meet the Queen, and we put the Bill or William Webb Ellis in the middle of the group. We had a big circle and we sung the national anthem, and everyone was really, really emotive around that.
Once again, in the dressing room after the 1999 World Cup final, the players were sculling from the Webb Ellis trophy. Even John O'Neill got into the emotion of things.
We'd readily agreed to pay bonuses, and there was no argy-bargy about that. But then in the dressing room, there's this chant, like a bit of a song, come on Johnny, double the bonus, come on Johnny, double the bonus. Anyway, David Clark, the chairman, was there, and I said to Dave, what about it? He said, let's do it. So we, on the spot, doubled the bonus and brought the house down, and they were pretty happy boys. So, and we were, look, the difference it makes to the game, the following year, player participation, in other words, the number of boys and girls, men and women playing the game grew by 45%. Just went through the roof. And then we set ourselves up for a magic 5 years.
That's a really important point John O'Neill just made. Winning big games is everything, not just for making players and sponsors happy, but for inspiring the next generation. Every football code knows you have to keep kids joining suburban clubs and showing up at cold ovals on Thursday nights for training, because families are a critical revenue stream. The kids pester mum and dad for the team merchandise, the family buys tickets to the games, they watch rugby on TV. You have to make the kids want to be a Wallaby. Gregan says Australia was at the peak of their powers back then.
I think we were winning everything. World Cups, Tri-Nations, British and Irish Lions, Bledisloes. And then Ealesy retired. It was a great Bledisloe when he finished up. Kev scored a great try. So we were at the peak of our powers. And also with Australian rugby, provincially, the Brumbies were also sort of tracking in the same direction. We were sort of just playing final after final, not winning as many as we would have liked. But anyway, those bloody Crusaders got in the way a few times. But there was just this attitude of like, we're doing really well. We're like, people are chasing us, but let's make them keep chasing us. Let's not sit still. And that was definitely the attitude I wanted to take into the Wallaby team after Ealesy. Like, the team was going great, but there was going to be changeover. There was already a bit of a burn rate and a churn rate. We'd lost people like Jason Little, Tim Horan, David Wilson's, Dan Crowley's, Ealesys. We lost some wonderful players. Mark Connors, other guys over a period who was a great sort of player in the squad during that time as well. And so it gave an opportunity for the younger guys. You're thinking of the Yolton Flatleys, your Nathan Sharps, etc., etc. That's the next generation coming through. But you wanted them to think, okay, well, you're in a very good team, but this team's got to be better. And that was kind of our attitude. And it was obviously driven by the leaders, but driven by Eddie, and we're always looking to try and get better. So we weren't as consistent as we were through that really good period from 98 through till 2001. That Wallaby team had an incredible, I think it was winning at 80+%.
And the people could not get enough of the Wallabies. Winning brought the masses through the gate, and their popularity was insane. The moment that sums it up best is July 15 in the year 2000. That night, 109,000 people crammed into the newly constructed Olympic Stadium in Sydney's Homebush for a Bledisloe Cup Test match. Jonah Lomu starred. It was a brutally close match. They called it the game of the century.
Well, it was billed as the greatest game of rugby ever played. Afterwards, one newspaper even headlined the game as a test match made in heaven.
It's raining tries here. It's a demolition at Stadium Australia. Here's Jason Little having a go. Here's Gregan. Stephen Larkham. He has more blood for a try. He's away. That's a great reply.
It was an incredible day. I think it was a test event for the Olympics, world record rugby crowd, and it was a game to match. Certainly the start of it was a bit worrying. After 8 minutes, you're down by 24 points to 0. You're not sure what to say at those moments. But, again, we did have a couple of guys had retired, but we still had a very composed team. And so it was a team that was very focused on what's next. And we responded very quickly. And all of a sudden it's 24 all at half time. And then we're leading with minutes to go in the game, and we lost the game. But I remember walking off the field that night thinking that was extraordinary to be a part of. For a world record crowd to have such an extraordinary game. I remember walking off the field, and of course you're disappointed you've lost, but I felt prouder to have been a part of that game and the performance of our team in such an incredible game. So I felt prouder than I felt disappointed. And that's a big thing to say, because you feel desperately disappointed every time you lose a game.
John O'Neill was the rugby CEO at the time, and he had pushed the code into the professional era. O'Neill is all about business, and for him, it wasn't just a great game of footy, it was a phenomenal financial success.
You've got to pinch yourself. And nothing prepared me for... You just don't see a stadium with that many people in it. And it's still a world record today, and won't be broken because they just don't build stadia that big. But again, the lesson is quite compelling. A winning team playing entertaining rugby, and you could sell that stadium. We could have sold another 80,000 tickets. We sold it out in a matter of hours. And and again, it was magnificent game. There was that magic in the air. It was magic. I mean, it's a sea of gold as well.
A few weeks later, John Eales would produce an incredible moment in the Bledisloe Cup, which would be written into Australian rugby folklore.
Will decide the fate of the Bledisloe Cup.
John Eales made the winning kick.
Well, like a lot of these things, it was relief more than anything else, but joy and relief. Those moments, as I mentioned, they're great team moments, because as a team, we'd been through a lot of tight games, and, it might have been me that week, with Sterling Mortlock a couple of weeks later in South Africa. It might have been George Gregan's tackle or Stephen Larkham's field goal or Justin Harrison's line-out steal or a great scrum from the front row. Every person has a moment where they have to step up, and I suppose that was mine. But it didn't feel like an individual moment. It felt like a team moment, which it was.
John Stensolt is the Australian's award-winning business writer, and one of our producers, Eric George, interviewed him for this podcast. John says the Wallabies by the year 2000 were not only powerful on it, but also off the field. They attracted TV ratings that went well into the millions whenever they played, and the brands, they just loved them.
Wallabies games, particularly against New Zealand, were a great occasion. So you get crowds of 70, 100,000 even in Sydney when the Olympic Stadium was at its peak capacity. The games on 7 Network then would achieve huge ratings. You might get 1 million people watching a Wallabies game, which 10, 20 years before then would have been unheard of. I remember particularly the sponsorship power that the Wallabies had. It felt like that every second ad on TV involved a Wallabies player flogging a brand of beer or food or phones. These were big times. Wallabies players became household names in a way.
And do you think there was a real confidence from within the sport too? They were, a big deal and they knew it?
The Wallabies was considered pretty much the number one Australian sports team.
The momentum continued into 2001 when the ARU oversaw an incredibly successful British and Irish Lions tour of Australia. Again, the stadia were packed. At Brisbane Suncorp Stadium, a sea of Red Lions fans seemed to dominate the stands. So, O'Neill, ever the innovator, threw money at the problem.
We spent $80,000 golding the stadium down in Melbourne, and Jeff Dixon was sitting behind me. He was then the CEO of Qantas, and we won. But the gold glitter and and the singing, and when we waltzing Matilda, etc. And Jeff Dixon tapped me on the shoulder and said, "We're going to extend our sponsorship." Just off the back of that night.
One of the players to make his debut during that tour was Justin Harrison, who's now the boss of the Rugby Union Players Association. He ran on in the third and final test at Docklands Stadium in Melbourne.
I remember the wall of sound that met me when I came on. I thought the entire world was at the stadium. I think it was 90-odd thousand people, and I'd never contemplated that many people could be that close together to watch me fail or succeed in a game.
It was a moment that would define his career.
So, when you think about playing your first test, don't do anything wrong. And then you think, oh, gee, I've got to contribute and validate my position. And I've got to prove my worth. And, I've trained, I've been selected for a reason. Then you start to calm down and you start thinking, okay, what are the things that I think I might be able to do well and offer value here? And, as a second row, that's one of my primary roles, line out defence and attack and bit of physicality and throw in a bit of niggle off the ball, and I've got the villain box ticked as well. So I remember being in that situation, thinking, look, this is an opportunity for me to back myself and the players around me. Some other players were involved in lifting me, and
what he did next secured the win.
What a wonderful jump in front, right in between the hands of Martin Johnson. He'll be filthy. They called him innate. They called him Neanderthal. I call him you good thing.
Everything was going well on the field and off it. The ARU had outlaid $2.5 million to bring the tour down under, but it was worth every cent. Australian Rugby made a $1.2 million profit, and that was even after handing out a record $6 million to affiliated unions. The series had blockbuster TV ratings. Remember, this is in the glory days of free-to-air television. On reflection, they seem like crazy numbers. Almost 3 million people watched the last and final deciding test of the Lions series. That even surpassed the previous biggest audience of 2.8 million for the 2000 Bledisloe Cup test in Sydney. But John O'Neill was never going to be satisfied with simply raking in the cash. He wanted to dominate Australian sport. So, O'Neill's radical idea was this. If rugby union could accumulate a war chest of $100 million, he could knock off rugby league by simply buying up the league's best players. How do you get $100 million? Host a World Cup. The idea leaked in 2002. and O'Neill was immediately rebuked by the World Rugby bosses, but he wasn't daunted. Soon he was meeting with billionaire Kerry Packer in his Sydney office. When O'Neill walked in, Packer was sitting in a giant chair, his feet on his desk. He was chewing Minties and watching several TV sets at once. Packer was blunt. Rugby union was boring. These are Packer's words, voiced by our friend Luke McElveen, because we thought it needed to be said with gusto.
People don't come to see forwards barging into each other. At the end of the day, son, we're appealing to two different markets, and the power of rugby league's penetration into the western suburbs of Sydney is something I'd never give up or risk. You've got to clean up that dung heap at the Rucken Mall.
And I thought, yeah, maybe, because, you know, there's two parts of an apple, because, you know, rugby league at that point had really existed in the eastern states of Australia, a little bit in the north of England, and a little bit in New Zealand, whereas rugby union had this, after soccer, after football, it was the number 2 football code. So, you know, if you've reunified the game, how potent would it be? Anyway, after about a week, he called me back and said, look, really appreciate the conversation, but if I was 10 years younger, I'd have a crack, but no, I'll pass. So, but look, again, conceptually, it would have been very hard to do, and you know, the power brokers in the Northern Hemisphere would have been absolutely dropping their gin and tonics, but it would have been a terrific to reunify the game.
Now, the IRB originally awarded the 2003 World Cup to both Australia and New Zealand, but the Kiwis got all thingy over clean stadiums and hosting their domestic competition at the same time. New Zealand's national provincial competition was a big money spinner. The IRB and the NZRU were in dispute over these issues, and this opened the door in 2002 for Australia to host it on its own, as the NZRU was in breach of their contract. And so O'Neill seized the chance. But not everyone was happy about O'Neill's move. Members of the ARU board were pushing for him to give in to the Kiwis and let them be co-hosts. O'Neill wanted Australia to have all the glory and the money. It was a financial masterstroke, but it was also the beginning of his downfall.
We took the advantage. I mean, a lot of people will say, oh, O'Neill was lucky that he was there when there were so many good players, and I wholeheartedly. But in terms of the hosting of the World Cup in 2003, that had nothing to do with the players. That was me, and I'm not blowing smoke where it shouldn't go, other than to say that I was on my own on that matter. The board of the ARU were rather silent. I knew they were getting lots of calls from their New Zealand good old rugby mates, you know, trying to talk them down. And the board stepped back and let me walk the tightrope, and it came off. And then success has 1,000 fathers, and everyone thought it was wonderful. But we were going to make a lot of money, and I wanted to lock the money up, and there were those that did not want that to happen.
Lock the money up. That's what John O'Neill just said. O'Neill wanted to keep the money in an investment trust and distribute only the interest to state member unions like New South Wales and Queensland and other parts of the game. This idea was cemented in O'Neill's mind at one of his son's rugby games at a Sydney private school, on the North Shore, of course. There, O'Neill had a conversation with the Australian Olympic Committee boss, John Coates, a friend and a mentor whose son was also on the field. Coates told O'Neill this was how he made sure the AOC was financially strong. The Sydney Olympics reaped $99 million for the AOC. Coates formed a trust, parked the money, and the sports have to make do with the interest. Here's John Coates.
I was watching a game between one of my youngest son and one of John O'Neill's sons. They went to different schools, and we were standing there, as one does, not getting involved in our children's sport. But I did say to him, just make sure you don't piss it up, don't allow them to piss it up against a wall. And obviously referring to the fact that with Sydney we'd managed to put the money aside, and by then it was already showing its worth in terms of the distributions being made to the Australian Olympic Committee.
And how much is your war chest worth today, John?
Our war chest, we started in 2001 with 101 million, and it got to, I think, 172 million at the beginning of 2020, and it's within 1 or 2 million at the end of 2020, notwithstanding the volatility and the hit that everyone took on COVID. But what has to be stressed is that that's after distributions of, I think, in the order of 130 million to the AOC over the last 20 years. So you add the 120, whatever it was, or is, to the assets, and you'll see that the money's trebled effectively, and we've done very well.
Unsurprisingly, John Coates has been approached and agreed to be part of the Rugby World Cup bid committee for the 2027 tournament. In the next episode, we reveal how a single kick at the 2003 World Cup still makes former Wallabies cry, how rugby union turned the tables and started raiding rugby league stars, and what happens when you steal a door handle from the lodge. This has been The Breakdown, brought to you by The Australian. I'm Jessica Halloran, and this podcast was produced by Claire Harvey, with special thanks to Dylan Adams, Grace Richardson, Eric George, Stephen Samuelson, Wally Mason, and Nick Adams Jasper. The Breakdown is made possible by subscribers to The Australian. Subscribers can hear the full series now via the Australian app. You can follow our coverage and discover more about the series at theaustralian.com.au/thebreakdown.